understand what was really happening or where they were going. They were just getting on this big plane and going somewhere.
We were seating all those little infants, you know, in the bassinets on the highest loft of the plane. And when we got finished with that, we were asking who was going to go. And at that time, it was so, there was so much confusion that they couldn't find my passport. They didn't tell me about it, but they couldn't find my passport.
The loss of that passport saved Sister Reynold's life. It's believed that 243 children with 62 adults were on board. The Galaxy had an excellent safety record. It was a huge transport aircraft. Its giant ramp doors allowed easy loading. On this flight, though, they were to be the deadly weakness.
I was praying the whole time because I knew how happy our people were going. I was praying that the plane would get up safely and would get to its destination.
It was a prayer that was not to be answered. The first Operation Baby Lift flight left Saigon at 4:30 local time.
We were about, 12, 15 minutes into our flight when, in the middle of we just finished the checklist, and unbeknownst to us, due to uneven loading of blocks, the ramp failed on the rear of the airplane. Now, when that ramp failed, it caused the locks all the way around the rear opening to break away. And when that rear pressure door, which had 93 tons of pressure on it at the moment at 23,000 feet, well, that door exited very quickly.
The big door cut through the hydraulic cables, and pink hydraulic fluid gushed out. The door sliced off part of the tail.
When it went through the tail of the airplane, it took with it, unfortunately, all my flight controls to the tail. Now, the good news is I was left with 2 of my 4 hydraulic systems, and that at least left power to the surfaces so that I didn't gain all the aerodynamic characteristics of a rock. But with no flight control cables, then I couldn't change my airspeed.
Regina Arney was at the back on the upper deck.
I came up here to get some medication, and I was just closing the kit up and pushing it back and I was kneeling on this grate when we experienced a loud explosion, and then the cabin misted and fogged. When the fog cleared and I looked down through the gate where I was kneeling, I could see that the ramp was gone and the jagged edge of the floor from the cargo compartment, and there was pink fluid all over the floor. One of the loadmasters evidently had followed me up the ladder, and the force of the rapid decompression tore out the ladder, so he was hanging by his hand, just holding on to the top part of this gate, dangling over the South China Sea. We needed to get him up over the ladder and lay him on the floor and bring him into this part of the aircraft.
The control cables were dangling out of the back of the airplane like spaghetti. Well, that confirmed why I could do nothing to control my speed. So if I added power, I kind of went up, and if I took off power, I kind of went down. But that was a very delicate balancing act, and so we did that all the way back to Saigon.
The outskirts of Saigon, already under fire, were now threatened by a fully loaded aircraft out of control.
I got to about 200 feet off the ground. I said, well, there's no point in going in as a powered arrow. So I yanked the throttles to idle. And about that time, you come into ground effect. Now, ground effect is when you get within about 1 wing's span from the ground, you get a cushioning of air. And that further stopped my descent, so that when I touched down, except for the fact that I was going about 3 times too fast, the rate of descent was a normal landing descent.
We were flying over the city, and we saw the C-5 coming back in. And obviously at that time, we did not know that it was the same C-5. And we kind of started drifting over back toward the airbase because we wanted to watch it land. And we were quite a ways from it. We were a good probably 4 or 5 miles away, 3 miles away from it. We saw the planes go in on this approach, which looks normal, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared.
But when I touched down the first time, I thought, well, hey, this is going to work. I'm going to, quote, belly it in on the gear, and we'll come to a stop, and they'll come out and get us. And the next thing I knew, I was airborne again. And we went some distance again, not too high, but flew over the Saigon River.
The escape slides and the emergency exits started to inflate. And had they continued to inflate, they would have probably crushed everybody around them. One of the loadmasters had a little pocket knife in his flight suit, and he got up and took his pocket knife and slashed the slides so that they would stop inflating.
Now the second time when we touched down, we don't have gear wheels anymore. We've got big spikes sticking down, and when we did that, then that was a much harsher condition for the airplane, and when it did that, that caused the cargo compartment to break apart.
It just collapsed the bottom, so everyone downstairs was killed. But we did have quite a few survivors upstairs.
We hit the ground again, a much more forceful impact with the ground than the first one. And this particular loadmaster, he became airborne, sort of like a missile within the troop compartment. And as he went down the aisle, there was a young girl who was accompanying the orphans back who had her ear cleanly cut off. And he ended up crashing into the wall, and he died several days later.
The top part, where the passengers and the crew were, it just broke completely apart from the airplane. And it almost did like a complete 180 in the air and then hit and slid.